On the morning of December 7, 1941, the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century shifted with violent finality. As the sun rose over the Hawaiian Islands, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a carrier-based strike that would dismantle the centerpiece of American naval power in less than 2 hours. In the aftermath, the Pacific Fleet was not merely damaged. It was psychologically shattered. The smoke from Battleship Row marked the end of an era and kicked off a huge leadership crisis. Admiral Kimmel, a man of rigid discipline and traditional naval doctrine, stood in his office at the submarine base, watching his command burn. A spent machine gun bullet shattered his window, striking him in the chest and leaving a welt of physical manifestation of the blow his career had just sustained. Kimmel famously remarked that it would have been more merciful had the bullet killed him. Within 10 days he was relieved of command, his reputation tarnished by the Roberts Commission's findings of dereliction of duty. The United States now faced a two-ocean war with its primary Pacific striking arm resting on the seabed. The question for President Franklin D. Roosevelt was not just how to rebuild the ships, but who possessed the temperament to rebuild the spirit of the Navy. In Washington, D.C., the naval establishment expected a successor drawn from the traditional gun club, the cadre of admirals who had spent their careers mastering the massive rifles of the battleship fleet. According to the Mahanian doctrine that had governed naval thought for decades, the battleship was the ultimate arbiter of sea power. However, Roosevelt and Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox looked toward an unlikely figure, Rear Admiral Chester William Nimitz. Nimitz was a 2-star admiral serving as the chief of the Bureau of Navigation. He was a desk officer, a bureaucrat, and most importantly, a submariner. In a Navy culture that viewed submarines and aircraft carriers as mere auxiliaries to the battle line, Nimitz's resume was remarkably unconventional. He had never commanded a battleship in combat. His expertise lay in diesel engines and the logistical intricacies of underway replenishment. 10 months earlier, when Roosevelt had first offered him the Pacific Command, Nimitz had declined, citing his junior status and the potential for resentment among the 28 senior officers he would have to leapfrog. By mid-December 1941, however, seniority was a luxury the United States could no longer afford. Roosevelt's directive to Knox was blunt: tell Nimitz to get to Pearl Harbor and stay there until the war was won. The president recognized that the Pacific War would not be won by traditional gunnery duels, but by a combination of carrier aviation, submarine interdiction, and complex logistics, the very fields where Nimitz excelled. Nimitz arrived in Oahu on Christmas Day, 1941, traveling under a pseudonym and dressed in a civilian suit to maintain security. The scene awaiting him was apocalyptic. The harbor was a graveyard of twisted steel and congealed oil. The stench of charred wood and decomposing remains still hung in the air. As he toured the wreckage in a whaleboat, Nimitz observed the masts of the USS Arizona and the capsized hull of the USS Oklahoma. That evening, Nimitz sat for dinner with the disgraced Admiral Kimmel. Nimitz faced an incredibly awkward moment, but he handled it with the smooth confidence that marked his leadership style. Instead of offering criticism, he told Kimmel that the disaster could have happened to any officer in the same position. This gesture was not merely polite. It was a calculated step toward stabilizing a command climate paralyzed by fear and the anticipation of a purge. On December 31, 1941, the change of command ceremony took place. Because every battleship in the harbor was either sunk or severely damaged, Nimitz chose to hoist his flag on the deck of a submarine, the USS Grayling. It was a symbolic transition. The old Navy of the battleship era was dead. The new Navy of the submarine and the carrier was assuming the burden of the war. The most critical decision of Nimitz's early tenure occurred not on the high seas, but within the walls of the Pacific Fleet headquarters. Kimmel's staff officers, including Intelligence Officer Edwin Layton and War Plans Officer Charles McMorris, lived in a state of professional despair. They expected to be court-martialed or, at the very least, transferred to obscure posts. They were the men who had missed the signs of the attack, and the public clamored for their heads. Nimitz called the staff together and delivered a message that stunned the room. He announced that he had full confidence in their abilities and intended to keep the entire staff intact. He understood a fundamental truth that many in Washington ignored. These men knew the Pacific. They knew the Japanese Navy's tactics better than any fresh replacements could. By retaining them, Nimitz secured an immediate and fierce loyalty that would pay dividends in the months to come. He specifically challenged Edwin Layton to become the enemy. He wanted Layton to think like Admiral Nagamo and Admiral Yamamoto, to anticipate their moves through instinct as much as through intelligence. This collaborative approach transformed the headquarters from a site of mourning into a center of aggressive strategic planning. The loss of the battleships forced an immediate evolution in naval strategy. Nimitz recognized that the aircraft carrier was now the capital ship of the fleet. However, he also saw the untapped potential of the submarine force. While the battleships burned, the submarine base and the harbor's massive fuel oil tank farms had been left untouched by the Japanese. This was a strategic oversight of the highest order. Nimitz, the submarine expert, began to overhaul the silent service. He replaced cautious peacetime commanders with aggressive leaders and pushed for technical improvements to the infamously unreliable Mark 14 torpedoes. He understood that while carriers provided the headlines, submarines would provide the garrote, eventually strangling the Japanese Empire by cutting off its supply of oil, rubber, and food from the conquered territories of the South. The first 6 months of 1942 were a period of desperate holding actions. Nimitz authorized carrier raids against the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, followed by the audacious Doolittle raid on Tokyo in April. These actions did little physical damage to the Japanese war machine, but they were vital for American morale. They proved the fleet could still strike back. This period culminated in the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, the first naval engagement in history where the opposing ships never sighted one another. While the loss of the carrier USS Lexington was a blow, the battle successfully checked the Japanese advance toward Australia. The true test of Nimitz's leadership and his trust in his staff came in June 1942. Intelligence intercepts suggested a massive Japanese offensive directed at Midway Atoll. While some in Washington remained skeptical of the codebreakers in Hawaii, Nimitz staked the remains of the Pacific Fleet on their findings. He positioned his 3 available carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown northeast of Midway, in a brilliant ambush. The resulting victory at Midway saw the destruction of 4 Japanese fleet carriers and the loss of their most experienced aviators. In a single day, the strategic initiative in the Pacific shifted from Tokyo to Nimitz's headquarters in Oahu. Chester Nimitz was the architect of a victory that many in 1941 thought impossible. He inherited a fleet in ruins and a staff in disgrace. Through a combination of technical expertise, strategic flexibility, and a profound sense of human decency, he rebuilt the United States Navy in his own image, quiet, steady, and relentless. He proved that leadership is not found in the volume of one's voice or the size of one's battleship, but in the ability to foster excellence in others during the darkest hours of a nation's history. The admiral nobody wanted became the one man the Pacific could not do without. As the war progressed, his influence extended beyond the tactical level, shaping the very nature of joint operations and maritime logistics that would eventually lead to the surrender in Tokyo Bay. His legacy is not merely one of tactical brilliance at Midway, but of institutional resilience. He understood that a fleet is more than its hulls and engines. It is the collective will of the men who man it. By preserving that will in the wake of Pearl Harbor, Nimitz ensured that the ultimate outcome of the conflict was never truly in doubt.